Major fitness myths that have been officially debunked by science in 2026. This guide is perfectly tailored for you, the beginner gym goer who wants to build muscle and get stronger without getting distracted by all the noise. Let's get right into it. So let me ask you, have you ever felt totally overwhelmed by all the contradictory gym advice floating around on social media? It's like one influencer tells you one thing, and the very next day someone else tells you the exact opposite. It's incredibly frustrating, right? Especially when you're just trying to get the basics down. Well, consider this explainer your ultimate science-backed clarity bringer. We are tossing out the hype and relying strictly on the data. Here is our game plan for today. We'll start with pre-workout drink myths, move into biology, age, and muscle, then tackle the slow lifting myth, and finally wrap up with your science-backed next steps. All right, section 1, pre-workout drinks, myths versus science. Let's take a closer look at what you're drinking before you even touch a weight. Okay, let's dive into this first massive myth. You might have heard this entirely theoretical idea that morning caffeine is basically useless because of how it interacts with your adenosine receptors. But actually, science says the exact opposite. Research shows morning caffeine works perfectly, and here's why. It actually elevates your core body temperature. Usually, your body temp is naturally higher in the afternoon, which is when we typically perform our best. But that morning cup of coffee essentially speeds up this temperature elevation, offsetting that natural grogginess you get from waking up and training early. Now, hold on. Before you go chugging endless cups of coffee expecting massive gains, let's look at the actual long-term effects. While morning coffee absolutely gets you going physically, science shows its actual effect on long-term muscle growth is kind of marginal. Why? Well, you build a tolerance to it pretty fast, which blunts those long-term physical effects. So it really boils down to a mental benefit. It makes you feel better and it helps you push harder. But if your effort is already up there, caffeine isn't going to magically build the muscle for you. Moving on to our second supplement myth, citrulline. This is one that frequently, and incorrectly, I might add, gets sneaked into lists of evidence-based muscle builders. It's heavily promoted to beginners as an absolute must-have for getting a pump and seeing massive growth. But man, the science tells a very different story. Check this out. A recent meta-analysis of 9 different studies looked at citrulline supplementation to see if it actually augmented muscle growth from resistance training. Want to know the average effect on muscle mass across all 9 of those studies? Exactly 0.0. So the crucial takeaway here, if you're a beginner, just save your money. Citrulline supposedly works by slightly altering blood flow to give you a tiny bit more energy for maybe a few extra reps. But in reality, it just means you're going to have to work harder and longer just to get the exact same results. Seriously, skip it. On to section 2, biology and age myths, where we're tackling age and gender limits. Let's bust some of those biological myths that tend to discourage beginners before they even start. You've probably heard this myth tied to the number 15. It goes like this. Because women generally have about 15 times less testosterone than men, they must have a 15 times lower potential for muscle growth and strength. I mean, it sounds biologically logical, right? Well, it is completely false. A recent meta-analysis of 27 studies decisively found that men and women actually have the exact same relative potential for strength development and muscle growth. Yes, guys naturally start with a higher baseline of absolute muscle mass. That's true. But relative to their starting point, women gain the exact same proportion of muscle and strength as men do. The reality here is that testosterone does not seem to affect the rate of muscle growth nearly as much as you think. It's highly individual. It isn't just about the total amount in your body, but rather how your specific body uses that amount. Testosterone largely explains the higher baseline muscle men start with, for sure, but it absolutely does not limit a woman's relative rate of growth once she starts lifting weights. Let's build on that and look at the menopause myth. This one claims that reaching menopause destroys your ability to change your physique. But in reality, a meta-analysis comparing women's strength training before and after menopause found that strength development, muscle growth, and fat loss were completely identical. Your biology is literally not working against you here. In fact, here is honestly one of the most empowering truths in fitness. Aging itself is not nearly as bad for your gains as people think. It's being sedentary and having a poor diet for decades that wrecks your physique, not just getting older. Studies consistently show that folks in their 90s make significant changes to their physiques when they start lifting. Honestly, if someone in their 90s can do it, so can you. Moving right along to section 3, the slow lifting myth, where we're rethinking rep tempos. Now that you're fueled up and biologically empowered, let's look at a major myth regarding your actual lifting technique. Okay, you've definitely seen this. People in the gym agonizingly lowering their weights, counting seconds in their head like a human metronome, all because they think it builds more muscle. But two recent meta-analyses show that increasing the eccentric duration, which just means slowly lowering the weight, does not increase muscle hypertrophy. Plus, counting reps to a metronome is just incredibly impractical. The science-backed alternative? Explosive and controlled lifting. It's totally intuitive and it actually maximizes your strength performance. To really understand why slow lifting is a myth, we just have to look at mechanical tension. Think about it. When you do slower repetitions, you end up doing fewer of them simply because you get tired way faster. Because of this, the total amount of strain placed on your muscles remains exactly the same as if you were just lifting normally. Slower reps literally just complicate your workout without adding a single benefit to muscle growth. So your rule of thumb for every single exercise is just this: control the negative, explode the concentric. You don't need a stopwatch. Just control the weight on the way down so gravity isn't doing the work for you, and then push or pull it up explosively. This maximizes your repetition performance and, best of all, keeps things wonderfully simple. Finally, Section 4, Science-Backed Steps. Let's turn all this debunked science into a clear, actionable roadmap for your very next gym visit. All right, here are your 3 liberating takeaways. First up, enjoy your morning coffee if you need that mental boost, but definitely leave overhyped supplements like citrulline on the shelf. Second, ignore those biological myths. Your age and gender do not limit your relative potential for growth. And third, ditch the metronome. Just control the weight down and power it up. Consistency and straightforward effort are always going to trump hyper-specific optimization. Which brings us to a final question I want to leave you with today. If aging and gender aren't your limits, and if you don't need expensive supplements or super complicated tempos, what is stopping you today? The science clearly shows your body is incredibly capable of adapting and growing, no matter who you are. So trust the process, ignore all that social media hype, and go crush your next workout. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.